Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Science in the Lab. For today, for our objective, we are going to be looking at properties of soil. But specifically, our lab that we're going to do is going to be talking about how soil retains water. So let's go ahead and look at the materials that we're going to be using for this lab. So we have 4 different types of soil. I have potting soil in the first one, and then we have sand, we have clay, and we have gravel. We also have coffee filters that we need, food coloring, water. In the graduated cylinder, we need 100 milliliters of water, and we also need our funnel. Okay. We also are going to be using paper plates so that we can use this on the side. Okay. We also need our timer, and we have it set already at 2 minutes. So let's go ahead and get started. For our lab, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be measuring 50 milliliters of soil. So we have everything already measured out. So we're going to go ahead and start with the first one. The first one, our 50 milliliters of soil, we're going to go ahead and pour it into the paper filter. And we are going to pour 100 milliliters of water in onto top of the soil. And we're going to set our timer for 2 minutes. And we're going to measure how much water is the soil going to release. And we're going to then be able to measure how much soil was retained, how much water was retained by the soil. Starting our timer. Okay, so now we're going to remove the soil and the filter and place it on the plate. We want to go ahead and notice how much water is inside of our graduated cylinder. Now, you can remember, we put 100 milliliters of water, so now we have less. So we need to calculate how much water is still in the soil. If we have, can we read that? That looks like 96 milliliters. So if there's 96 milliliters of water in a graduated cylinder, how much water is in the soil? Let's figure that out.
Let's pause the video here and think. If we started with 100 milliliters of water and now only have 96, how much is left in the soil?
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to repeat the same investigation, the same steps that we did, but now we're going to use a different soil. Now we're going to be using sand. So again, 50 milliliters of sand and 100 milliliters of water. Our timer. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do now, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, remove our soil, place it on the plate. Now again, let's go ahead and look at these measurements. Remember, we had 100 milliliters of water. Look at the water that was released. We have 72 milliliters of water inside the graduated cylinder. So how much water did the soil retain?
Again, let's pause the video and think. We had 100 milliliters to start off with, and now we only have 72. How much was retained in the soil?
Okay, so our next soil that we're going to do is clay. So filter 50 milliliters of clay. And 100 milliliters of water. Start our timer. Now, if you notice, the water is dripping out slower than the previous two. Okay, so now let's go ahead and remove our soil. And let's measure. Now, how am I measuring? So I have the 40 and then 60. This next line would be 70. This would be 80, right? So these lines I'm counting by two. So 60, 62, 64, 66, 68, because this one will be 70. So my water level is at 68 milliliters. So if this is at 68 and we had 100, how much water did the soil retain? Figure that out.
Let's pause and think. We started with 100 milliliters. We now only have 68. How much was retained in the soil?
Okay, so our last type of soil. So what do you think will happen here? This is gravel, 50 milliliters of gravel. Is the soil going to retain in the gravel?
Pause the video and think. What will happen to the water in the gravel?
Let's see. Again, 100 milliliters of water. And a timer, 2 minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove. And let's go ahead and calculate. So again, we had 100 milliliters of water. I'm looking at, this is 80, this other line is 90, the one in the middle. So 92, 94, 96 milliliters of water. How much water was retained by the gravel?
Okay, pause the video. Let's make our calculation. We had 100 milliliters of water. Now we only have 96. How much was retained by the gravel?
Okay, so in conclusion, what have we learned here? What were your calculations? Which soil was the one that retained the most? So if you were doing your calculations right, the soil that did retain the most was right here, our clay. Okay, it does look different and it does look very wet compared to the other soils. Our next soil, if you calculated right, would have been the sand. Following the sand, then it would have been our soil. And lastly, the one that retained the least was our gravel. Boys and girls, make sure that you write your data, make sure that you have everything in your journal, and I'll be seeing you soon.